welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another episode of Tech Girl Thursdays. Today I am here with Olga and she's going to be sharing some of her experiences over the years she's worked in the data science field. So I'm super excited to talk with her today. Thank you so much for joining me, Olga. It really means a lot. Just to start off, to kick things off, can you give a short intro about yourself and your background?
I'm Olga. I'm currently Senior Product Analyst. I did a transition from data science and quantitative analyst role into product data analyst. As I think like product analyst is the best position ever because it has combination from business side and technology side into one role. I feel like it's a perfect place to feel how business is developing and strategy. So I can speak a lot about that. So I started my career back at change.org as the world's largest platform for petition, where I was quantitative analyst at data science team. And we've been working on recommendation, optimization, product metrics, email marketing support campaign. And then I wanted to try consultancy for a long time. I had this idea of being consultant, working with different tools, different companies. So I joined Primitive Logic. It's a premier digital consultancy, which a few years later was acquired by Logic 2020 because they've been growing and had a chance to work with different companies, with small companies to large one. And part of consultancy, my role was very different. It could be quantitative analyst working with the finance in a bank. It could be a data analyst working in a healthcare, like with Genentech. It could be a large support managing role working at Microsoft. So depending on the client, responsibilities could be very different. So after consultancy, I wanted to come back to a startup environment because I felt overwhelmed with large enterprises work and I wanted to get back to flexible environments. So currently I'm part of a very small startup called vidIQ. We're working on top of YouTube, driving YouTube creators grow, and we're providing analytics for creators, develop their channels, grow their subscriber base. So we're helping them how to create the right strategy for their growth. So that's where I'm right now. I'm currently a product analyst role. I'm working with marketing, core tooling, data platform teams together on driving user growth.
I can't wait to dive into all of those different experiences later in the call. But I guess to start off at the beginning, how did you first get into data science?
Yeah, so I have a statistics degree. I have bachelor's and master's, and I was very down on numbers, math, and stats. And when I finished my degree and started looking for a job and landed internship, it was very challenging. Even though I feel like I had enough foundation to get me going, but somehow getting into the industry, into the tech, and in the domain where I wanted to be working with social justice. It was hard. I didn't have experience. I didn't have the right terminology I need to use. I didn't have the project which people were looking for. So that was very challenging. And I didn't have mentors, so I didn't know what to focus on, what to look. And that was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, we didn't really have enough I would say guidance or even place where I could look and ask questions. Like right now, there are so many Slack communities, there are so many social groups on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I didn't even have LinkedIn profile 10 years ago. I didn't know how to look for a company. It was challenging. And I finished my degree back in Ukraine, so I moved to the United States. My English was really bad. I didn't have the networking needed. So it was a challenge. And I feel like those challenges are still very painful today, even though there are a lot of support and guidance from social campaigning, from different social channels like Slack, like LinkedIn, like Facebook. There are so many mentorship platforms. I still feel like recent graduates are struggling, as I do believe there is a big gap between academic environment and industry environment. And when I'm interviewing people for like data analysis role, for data science role, I feel like they speak so much, they know so much, but the answers they give me doesn't really help me to evaluate a candidate. It doesn't really help me to hire him or her for a specific role. So it means those challenges are still there, and I would love to think of ways what we can do to bridge the gap and to make this transition more organic and more smooth. And that's where I feel like the current industry leaders should focus on how to get how to help recent graduates to get started to get into the tech.
What do you see as like the biggest issue from like going from academia to industry, and how do you think like what's the best way to solve that or bridge that gap?
Yeah, I've been thinking for a while about that. I don't think there is a simple solution. I feel it should be tackled through different perspectives. So there is a first perspective, more practical part of the knowledge you're receiving. Academia is focusing on theoretical knowledge. So all those um, workshops, projects you're delivering, or lab works, they're very theoretical. And you don't always know what the outcome of your work, how it can be used to drive revenue, to drive user growth, right? So I feel like internships is one of the things to do, but even getting the internship can be challenging because there's so many candidates and like not too many open internship positions. So like landing an internship is very, very difficult today. So to bridge that, I would advise you to do a few things. First of all, make sure you have a strong portfolio. So every project you're working on in your class, make sure it's documented somewhere, and making sure you have appropriate visualizations which you can showcase your knowledge. Because resumes are working, but in your resume you don't have experience, right? So you will only have skills and you only have your degree. You don't have much experience to talk with. So you can use your portfolio as a good starting point for your foundation. In your portfolio, you can include a list of projects you're working on, or if you're delivering machine learning model, making sure you're describing what's the objective for your model, how you, which algorithm you pick, how you land on this accuracy score, and then you describe, make sure you spend a lot of time on the business description for a project, put it into portfolio. It could be either a GitHub. It actually can be a blog article on Medium or like some of the writing platform, just when you give a brief description what you're working on. And that portfolio can work already as a experience. So you can put into experience question, right? And when interviewers speaking to you, they already can see like you have experience with something. So I feel like it should be easier. Another part about overall academic environment, like I said, it's too theoretical, and I wish there would be more collaboration between current companies and either boot camps or universities which they're working on, and we would have where we could do a knowledge transfer. When people come in, for example, from Facebook, they come in for different sessions and they're sharing what type of projects they're working on, what type of skills they needed for. I feel like that would help graduates get idea what they will have to do in the future much better way.
I've definitely experienced that gap, and I've been to, I think, one boot camp, and that was really interesting because I got a little more practical exposure, but it was hard to find that boot camp to begin with. So I
So
think that's
that's
part of the
another challenge with boot camps. There are so many of them, and personally, I'm a little against like the current boot camps. I feel like they put too much on plate for a very short period of time, and which makes people overwhelmed. And even though they're getting the programming skills they need, they often don't really have business understanding of the objective of the project, how this how the data they're getting can be used in which ways, what it's supposed to do. Like any projects you're working on, it's supposed to either drive revenue or drive user growth, and then how exactly it will happen. So that's where the gap is happening. But still, nevertheless, I do feel boot camps, they kind of getting exposure into what you will be working on, which is very, very helpful. But academic environment is not a boot camp. So boot camp is kind of like a bridge into the world for you. Um, but they can be very overwhelming and very difficult.
Diving into kind of your industry experience, so you
Mhm.
mentioned before in your intro, you mentioned you were working at change.org, you did
Mhm.
consulting work, now you're at a startup. Um,
Mhm.
so all very different experiences across different domains. So I'm curious how were these experiences, and what type of work and projects were you doing?
The roles I've been at, they're very cross-functional, which means you have to wear different hats depending on where you are. And in big companies like Microsoft, or like when I was at First Republic, there is one expectation from a data analyst, data scientist. In a small company, there is another expectation. So my projects change it depending on the company size. Even at Change.org, I came there when it was a small company, and in 4 years we scaled it and we grew so much. We get to a different scale of development, a different scale for everything. So my responsibility has been changing a lot. So if you have an analytical role, you have to be flexible, adjusting to different expectations, for different tools you're working with, for different size of the team you're working with. Um, for some people, it can be challenging. I personally, I love it. I feel like we always evolving, and I love to see this evolvement. So let's see, getting down more into the project. For Change.org, it was a lot of working with the metrics, understanding how we defined monthly active users, how we defined user activity, user retention, user engagement, how we scale user engagement. So Change.org is the world's largest platform for petition. We work with a lot of petitions, and so user for us, how would you define user? A user who create a petition, or user who create profile but haven't started petition? Like those questions, they are a foundation question for your metrics. And we had to work a lot of with product managers to ensure we are on the same page in agreement how we define, and then data analyst had to code it into SQL, into a dashboard to report it, and then working with data engineers, making sure the data is what it's supposed to be, it's piping and it's displaying in a different applications, tools, because we are using Mixpanel. I don't know what they're using right now. There are a lot of marketing tools which also have data, and there are like backend tools and they're not matching. So you have to be able to explain the gap there. We did a lot of marketing campaigning. So marketing support on the user acquisition side is very common for data analyst work. From data science, working with petition is working with textual data. So we did some NLP there. We also did a lot of recommendation services. For example, if you signed a petition supporting animals, so we will send you a recommendation. You might be interested to support other petition for animals, for example. In terms of data acquisition, overall, I really love creative solutions that we ended up at Change.org. For example, we didn't have user gender data. We didn't collect it from our users. But for email campaigning, we wanted to do a campaign targeting female petition creators, for example, or male. So how would we get this data if we don't collect it? So we ended up creating, we actually, uh, we took user first name and we built a machine learning model based on a first name, which would create classification and assign a score to a name. So the score could be high, like Stephanie, right? It's like more likely female main, or Bob, that's more likely male main. Or a score could be low, it could be like Alex. Alex could belong to both, to women and men, right? So based on the score, then we have different user segments where we're more confident in the gender, less confident in the gender. So that's some of the workarounds how we get the data which we didn't have. And there can be many of those workarounds. I'm just giving one example. So if you don't have the data, it doesn't mean your project has to be stopped. You need to be creative how you can acquire data based on what you have. And Cheetah.org was a good example because it's a data-driven company, and we had a lot of data, a lot of big data. So we had to be smart how we're using it. Okay, so when I was working on the finance, everything was very different, completely different. Finance is such a dogmatic environment, and I keep saying for data analysts, healthcare, security, and finance are very challenging environments to be at. It doesn't give you flexibility to choose a tool you want, because everything you use must be in compliance with specific requirements. You might not have your favorite editor, your favorite database. You might have to use like Oracle, for example. I'm not a fan of Oracle. I hate using Oracle, but I was forced to use it, and so on. So the most common project for finance, it really depends on the size and depends on the team. It can be investment, it can be wealth management, it can be a data migration, it can be anything. And we could speak a lot about finance. I don't really want to switch the topic from the main projects. Just thinking, for enterprises and big companies, you always don't have flexibility over your role, and you're not choosing like who are your stakeholders, you're not choosing the tools you're using for data analysis. So you have to adjust to that environment where you are. And I still like it. I really loved finance. I feel like there's different type of expectations and pressure there, and it can be challenging, but it also can be interesting. And I had exposure to working with private wealth management data, and it was very interesting, actually, even to understand there are like 100 vendors. You're working with so many different vendors. You don't even have data on your own. You don't store it. You're getting it from vendors. So how to make sure the data you receive from vendors actually makes sense? So you have to be a bit advocate there, and because you want to receive data in one format, but they send you in another format. So you need to kind of like think how you're working together. So a little politics might be involved. It was interesting.
They sound like very different experiences, but they sound like very good, I guess, learning experiences.
A lot of learning moments. I want to say by the end of the day, it's data. And when you work with data, you follow the same framework. Doesn't really matter company size, revenue, team structure. You're still gonna follow the same framework. You have to create objective for your analysis. You have to acquire the data. You have to transform data. You have to analyze it, then visualize it, then deliver. So this framework will stay the same regardless of where you are. Either you're data scientist or data analyst, you're gonna follow this framework. But the timelines, the expectations, the tools, they will be different. And the flexibility you have in terms of how much you can acquire data, how much you can extract data for a specific healthcare industry or some of the finance or securities. You don't always have flexibility to export your data like into CSV file because it can be sensitive data. You cannot export socials or like some private user data. It's coded. So you have to be smart how you work with it. You have to meet specific requirements. How data is stored, is it secured? And when you deliver analysis, you have to be double careful. Who are your stakeholders, making sure you're not exposing data to the wrong audience. So definitely finance, healthcare, security puts more pressure, which you have to keep in mind and think. But the framework for data analysis stays the same. Regarding framework, you will spend different time for each of those steps. Sometimes you first require data, but longer analyzing. Sometimes analysis is actually straightforward, but acquiring data is such a challenge because the data might be not structured. So then you need to use Python or whatever to read it first and extract it, and then to transform it. And data transformation usually for me is the longer step, because I used to then stack with like timestamps, date formats into strings, strings into text, text into integer, and so on, and can take forever. But depending on the project, it actually can be easier for you, but visualization can be the most time consuming depending the objective for a project and for your audience. There are so many companies whose product is visualization, so they invest a lot. So you need to think about it and meet specific expectation when you deliver your visualization. Do they have to be interactive? How sophisticated they have to be? How much data you can load for these visualizations, and so on. So also depends which applications, tools you're using. Sometimes all those steps can go nice and smooth, but reporting can be a challenge because your stakeholders might not have enough insight what you're talking about, or they don't have enough understanding of the project or subject. And that's actually like the last step, like delivering your analysis is crucial. How would you explain the project you spent a month of work in the 5 minutes to someone? It takes sometimes such a skill to be general but not too general, to explain details but not go too deep. I don't know, I'm still struggling with it, and I see a lot of other people struggling with it, especially data scientists. They don't always have enough business acumen to explain why this model has to be tuned in this way rather than this way, right? Yeah, comes with experience.
Yeah, that's something I've heard about, just that last step of kind of wrapping up the analysis into a very digestible format for the audience. That's almost one of the most important parts, because like almost going from like super technical models and everything to something that other people can understand. Do you have any tips on how to do that well?
So first of all, that's the most important part of all your framework for analysis. If you fail this step, doesn't really matter how much you spend time on data transformation, on data acquisition, on visualization. Like if you fail this last step, no one will ever know how much work you spent doing something, right? So you have to be very responsible about this step. Invest your time in a proper format, right? So the first rule of thumb, the less is more. It's harder to say than do. When you spend so much time acquiring data and then you're like removing those insights, it's so painful sometimes, but you have to do it, because the less you put, the more clarity it will give for people. If they ask for questions, then you can send deep dive report, but your first presentation, keep it nice, clean, and concise. Do not put too much into stats, right? The second, my rule of thumb. So there are two types of analysts. There are people who tell you how much money you make, and there are people who tell you how much money you could make. And it's very common to find the first type of analyst, and it's very challenging to find the second one. It doesn't really matter your technical skills here, that's your mindset, how you see the problem. And here, you're not only presenting the data or presenting the outcome of your analysis, you're given the guidance and you're given recommendations for businesses. If you're supporting on some MVP analysis, you have to give specific recommendation. Like, given we have this size of data, we cannot improve our model to this accuracy score, for example. That's the best where we can land. Or if we can spend more time on additional feature engineering and we will acquire one more data value or like one more data point, we will be able to improve these models that much. So it takes a lot of time to get there, but I feel like those are very essential points which I'm missing. So yeah, I guess those would be my advices. Keep it nice, clean, invest a lot of time into recommendations and suggestions. And that should help it make more readable your analysis for business stakeholders.
Going back to your experiences, so you've had different roles and titles. So like there's data scientist, there's data analyst, consultant, product analyst.
Mm-hmm.
What are the like similarities and differences?
It's actually a very good question, and it's difficult to answer it concise. So the similarity is you're working with data by the end of the day. So regardless which title you have, you need to have skills how you extract data. You need to have understanding how to work with structured and unstructured data, and you need to have business acumen. So that stays regardless of your title flavor, I would say it. So the differences here, um, the differences keeps changing with the time. Like 5 years ago, there was one understanding. Right now, it's another one, and in 10, like next year, it'll be something else. So I feel like they're becoming. There used to be one role, data scientist, really, and data analyst, and they just started merging together into one. And right now, I feel like they're merged, but at some companies, they still try to differentiate product analyst from data scientist. But that really depends on the type of company, product, and so on. So let's start from data scientist. Data scientists are all been evolving a lot, and I feel like the larger company, the more generalized this role can be. The smaller company, the more specific it can be, although it also doesn't make sense from one perspective. Let's see. So at a Facebook, for example, or at Lyft, a data scientist is a person who actually more on the business side. So you're working with metrics, with definitions, you're calculating the right KPIs, you're working on monitoring and extracting this data, you're working on metrics for your model measurement to make sure you measure your performance for your modeling correctly, and you're working with a lot of business stakeholders. There will be differentiation between machine learning engineer, which is another role. So machine learning engineer is actually more on statistics side, working, tuning and developing model, rather data scientist and mostly tracking performance for that model. So that differentiation between machine learning engineer and data scientist at big companies is the way I see it right now. There also can be deep down specialization like reinforced engineer, like reinforced learning, like unsupervised learning engineer. There can be NLP specialty, which can be very separate. So let's speak right now about data analyst. And some companies, it is data scientist. At some companies, it's quantitative analyst and so on. I feel like data analyst is disappearing. And it gets breakdown either into data scientists, so you go that way, or you go into product analysis or business intelligence, which is another way. So data scientists, we already spoke with it. It's mostly working with machine learning and measurement performance for machine learning. From product side, there's like product analyst role. Product analyst is very down into the business side. So it's kind of like on the edge between business and technology. So from one side, you're working with business stakeholders, understanding the business strategy, defining KPIs, defining roadmap, defining where initiatives have to be done. Is it done for onboarding user flow, or is it done converting into specific bucket users, right? Or are you playing around with value proposition or not? So that's where product analysts should bring insight. How we defined active users, how we define retention, what is user churn. So you must have a strong acumen, business acumen here to understanding how business is being developed, what KPIs must be in place, how to calculate KPIs, how to calculate lifetime value, for example. But from the same time, you're taking these KPIs and you have to code them. You're coding them into reporting tool. It can be Tableau, it can be Power BI, it can be a simple dashboard. It doesn't really matter what you use for your reporting, but you need to have ability to use SQL and Python to bring the definition into the display and then create visualization for the display. If you like it, can be simple structured data. If you don't like it, it can be messy and structured data. So you will spend a lot of time on transformation and acquiring it. As I say, every company is different. So to summarize, product analyst is more like cross-functional between business and technology. Data science, same way, but more on the technology side. Data engineering is very technology side and doesn't really requires data analysis. So we didn't speak for quantitative analyst. Quantitative analyst is very common for finance right now, less common for other domains. I feel like it's also slightly changing towards more specialized titles, like loan analyst or like pricing strategist. It can be any flavor of it, but by the end of the day, you are quantifying your data. So you will be working with a lot of segments for your data in terms of how it's used by teams. For finance, it can be reporting, like statement, creating balance reporting, revenue reporting financial statements. There will be a lot of QAing and auditing, making sure the data is aggregated in the right way. You will be doing a lot of monitoring, a lot of testing, and less designing. Again, quantitative analyst right now is more like finance domain as far as like what I notice how the industry is changing. Yeah, that's the main breakdown. I feel like every person will have its own perspective into it. Overall, I would say it's keep changing, but you will be working with data, but how the data is used, how you acquire, how you deliver it, that will be different.
What would you say are the most important skills for each of those roles?
Let's start from technical ones. So SQL must have right now. It's must have. You cannot be a data scientist or analyst without SQL. I wouldn't worry for SQL flavor. Right now, there are different SQL flavors. There's Postgres, there is Oracle, there is MySQL, there is SQL Server. The foundation's still the same, right? And I don't think you need to focus too much on PostgreSQL rather than Oracle or whatever. I feel like once you have the foundation, you will get there. So SQL is must have. Python is must have. The more and more, you will need definitely Python if you're working with big data. You will need less Python if you're working in finance or healthcare, because you will be, usually your segments are small and you're rather focusing on deep dives, like rather than large exploratory field. You need Python if your data is unstructured, or if it must be aggregated into a specific view. The same with R. I used to be R user, then I did a transition from R to Python. And I feel like Python is more popular. And people say it doesn't really matter, Python and R, it's easy to change. I would say it do matters if you're a beginner. If all your team is using Python, but you're R user, it's such a challenge to switch and do it fast. I don't think it will be a blocker for the interview, but once you're getting started on a team, it is important you are synchronized with everyone else and you're in the same flow with everyone else. So yeah, SQL, Python from technical side are the most important. If you're a business analyst or intelligence analyst, you need to have understanding of visualization tools like Tableau or Power BI. It's not difficult to get started, but it might be time consuming to understand how to build all those data sources, connect together, display. And you need to have strong business acumen in terms of understanding metrics, KPIs, measurements, how you evaluate model performance, how you evaluate strategy, what is the outcome of your analysis, how it can improve user growth, how it can improve revenue, so such type of things. And I would say the same across all roles, like all title flavors.
Kind of in general, what's your favorite part about data science? And what do you think the hardest part about data science?
The hardest part is to start. It keeps evolving. It keeps challenging. Not changing. It's a lot. And today there is democratization of data science. What's happening? So it becomes simpler. Other words, there are so many new tools which help you to perform machine learning. Oh my God, there's right now you can do machine learning in SQL. There's so many applications and tools which helps you run your prediction just using SQL. That's crazy. You don't need to even spend so much time learning all those algorithms, how they're getting created, how to set up the specifications. The only thing you need to do is feature engineering, and that's it. So the hardest part, how to stay in the loop with all those evolvement and changes. From foundation side of data science, I find feature engineering can be tricky. It was tricky for me. How you take the data what you have and make it work the most for your model. It's not always obvious from the first point of sight, but you always can be creative in the way how you can make your data work for you. Just because you have two columns doesn't mean you can extract much value from it and create a third column, which will be aggregation of first two, or which be something else. If you have missing data, have to know where you need to compute it, or you can just pick an average and you compute average, or where you can just ignore it and go on without it. So like feature engineering, I feel like is challenging in data science. And it comes with experience, but for me, it's still the most time consuming, where I spend a lot of time really understanding my data set. The favorite part, um, would be what data can do. I love hearing examples of the different data storytelling, how machine learning is used in healthcare, how we're able to automate and improve understanding of our different samples we're using for data, and see how healthcare is driven by data science. It's not there quite yet, but I do believe it will. And I heard amazing stories when parents been using machine learning on their own to understand the pattern for the child sickness behavior to predict when, so the child was sick on epilepsy. And when you have epilepsy, you can have a breakdown any moment. So they used machine learning model to acquire historical data and to predict the patterns when the breakdown will happen for the child again based on historical data. And like they did it on their own. I can share with you the link later for the story. It's actually amazing to read. And the point, you don't need to use sophisticated systems for it, but you can learn the patterns in your data. And these patterns can help you make a prediction or forecasting. And that's my favorite part, how we forecast stock market, right? It's amazing what we can do today.
Just the breadth that data science has and how it could be applied to so many different things, and predicting epilepsy, or like I just there's so much that you could do with data, which
Definitely,
is
you can run your own stock market forecasting predictions, right? And do investment on your own. You don't really need to use any sophisticated systems for it. And so much you can do. You can, well, we know how it's used across transportation, across traveling, in any industry. And it's amazing what big data can do.
it's so interesting because there's also so much data that hasn't been analyzed as well. There's so much data just waiting out there, that and there's like potential to analyze it, but there's just so much data being generated that
I know, and I'll give another example. Right now at vidIQ, we work with YouTube creators, right? So we're building a model which can help them improve their videos. So our machine learning pretty much telling you, if you put this title, you can generate this number of views, or you can have this number of reach. and it's amazing. Like a few years ago, like 10 years ago, I would never knew it's possible. But today, because we have this historical data of usage, of YouTube usage, we're able to optimize and recommend a strategy for creators and help them grow their channels, their subscribers, make their videos more sophisticated. It's nice. It's not only with YouTube, that because I'm working with vidIQ, but there are also so many other tools which help you drive and create a communities and drive your reach and impact. And yeah, it's amazing.
That's so cool. Yeah, just the amount of impact that data can have it still blows my mind. Out of your years in academia and industry, what's one of the most important things that you've learned?
There are many of them. First of all, know how to pronounce your terms if you're using them. It's like the most painful one, probably. Um, on the beginner side, invest a lot into technical skills. When you don't have experience, you don't have business acumen, that's okay. But to beat the competition which you're in, you need to be really decent on your skills. So the less experience you have, the stronger you have to be with SQL, with Python. So try to invest into that. Um, Data science is very competitive right now. It's very competitive. There are people from all types of backgrounds right now getting into it, and it will keep growing. So make sure you can stand out from the crowd. And to do that, you need to be really decent in your technical skills. Um, Later, when you have more and more experience, people will be focusing on your business acumen. So when we hire in senior roles right now for senior data scientists, we're actually looking to understand how well they feel the environment, the domain, the industry, how they feel business objective for the project, do they understand how they're gonna evaluate the model performance, the model adaptation. Um, but for junior, we usually focus more on the technical side skills. Um, so that's what I would work on. I think I said I'm writing a journal about data analysis, and I have a weekly newsletter. And I write things that I work on every day. So if I work on retention analysis, I'm making a deep dive how to write a code, how to understand user retention from different angles, how to deliver this project, what are my stakeholders, how my SQL should look like, what type of visualization I would use. So I wish I would have such type of resources back then when I started. I feel today people should leverage resources which there are around. It's easy to get lost, but it also helps you to understand type of things you will be working on with. Everyone has its own story being in data science and have different things where they find attractive in a data science. I'm getting fascinated by data itself, but I feel like the challenge is not really acquiring data, because people feel like the more data they have, the more successful they will be in a project, in a team, in a company. That's not always true. You can have little data, but you can be smart how you're using, and you can extract most value of it. Or you can use different libraries to create and pull additional data which you don't have. Like if you don't have income data, but you have a zip code, you can just touch average income per zip code and so on. And you can do like many other things. And that's a difference between like bad analyst and good analyst. Good analyst does not chase data, but instead spending more time with data what they have, making sure it brings the most value. Well, that would be my advice. Don't go out of big data, but rather focus on what data you have in-house or in your spreadsheet. Did you extract max of it? Like, are you creative in using it? Are you correct in using it? These are challenges, very interesting to solve.
You have a journal and a newsletter
Mhm.
that you write. So, I guess could you talk more about that and why
Yeah.
you wanted to start it and what your goals are for it?
I feel like there are a few different goals. One goal I already covered. I feel like there is today a big gap between academia and industry. This gap has not was addressed, and I feel like there is nothing companies do actually to address it. And I have so many frustrated friends who just graduated and they're looking for internship and they cannot land the first job. And this is like a big global actual issue. So I do hope my journal is like a small bridge into the industry. I'm writing things what I'm working on or been working before, and I'm giving the right perspective into it and giving the right terminology, how to understand the project. You might know the Python, but you should also know how you will be using Python in your work, and they can be very different things, right? Um, how to do feature engineering for that exact objective which you need to do, and not like overall. So that's one of the main goals why I'm writing a journal. Another one, I feel I did a transition from data science into product analysis. And product analysis today is very, how to say it, it's also changing. People are chasing technology without really understanding how to incorporate technology into outcome from business side. Um, there are like two things you do in this technology. You either want to increase revenue or you want to increase user growth, but you don't know it until you like getting into the project. So how to understand how to increase user growth, having skills you have. I wanted to address this through my journal. I want to make it very practical and excluding theoretical academia knowledge, which I expect you already have, how you take it and make it useful for you. Um, it's a difficult thing to do, and I hope my journal is like one of the tools which helps to bridge that gap. For my newsletter, I want to keep it light. I don't want to do too many deep downs, deep dives. So I'm covering a little bit of like news, events, skills, interview questions, expert insights. Right now, I'm doing a lot of interviews with really expert in the field, which can tell you when I'm hiring people, I expect they know this one, or I hope they know how to solve this challenge. And I feel like it's going to be very useful.
Where do you hope to see the journal grow in the future, or what are your goals for it?
I wish I'd have more time invested into it right now because I'm full-time employed and I just writing the things I do at work. But eventually, I do believe I will create a direction which will help people to use as a guidance whom they want to be, what titles they want to have, and what skills, experiences, and knowledge they must have in order to get there. So that's what I hope my journal will become and will be. I also have a side goal, create a community of data analysts who would stay connected together, where we could share and support each other. Even though I have experience, there are so many things I don't know, and I have like my favorite mentors and coaches whom I can ask. So I hope we will be the same for each other in my community. If someone is working on a churn and they don't know how to tackle it, I hope there will be some place where they can like go place where they can ask questions. And then I can like troubleshoot and ask advice. And I feel like we should support each other more. When we support each other, we encourage each other to move forward. And that's how we develop a domain, or that's how we develop a field. And I really hope one day my journal will be one of those tools.
Yes, I love that. I hope so too.
Good
I think
goal.
it's on its way. I think it's on its way get there. But you've worked at several different tech companies in different tech roles. So what has your experience been like as a woman in tech?
Good question. I've been asked it a lot, and I still don't have, I guess, appropriate answer to have it. From my personal experience, I feel like I've been lucky. Every company I worked at was very supportive and encouraging. I never really felt discriminated, neither at Change.org, or Logic 2020, or any of the clients with whom I've been working. I always felt respected, but that's my personal experience. I do know many stories at other companies, women facing the issue. The challenge from my side, when you're only one woman on a team, it's very challenging to speak up. Even though you know the answer to the question, and you hear when people brainstorm it, offer different solutions, it can be intimidating to offer your solution when you're the only one woman in the room. And it's easier with experience, but when you don't have that experience, you're a beginner, it can be very intimidating. So I would love to encourage people, not afraid to speak up, but know what you're talking about. God, you have to keep balance here, if it makes sense. So people, a lot of companies going for diversity right now, right? So it's a tricky question to tackle because when there is no enough supply, it doesn't matter there is a demand. You still want to have many women. So it's like a circle here. When there are not too many candidates, you still will hire the strongest one. Doesn't really matter if it's a woman or a man. But I feel like slowly we're changing it. I see today, every day, there are more and more women candidates in data science than it used to be like 5 years ago, right? We're changing it, we're improving it. I see a lot of like good positive direction here. And I feel like many companies are trying to do it to encourage, to diversify the teams, not only like for gender, but also for age, which is another common thing. Like when you're like over 50, it's very hard to land a position, or even when you're over 45 rather than 25. And it's nice if your company is moving the direction, trying to be diversified. If not, you should speak up and do your best to leadership to be proactive in that if you can, although it can be intimidating. If you feel intimidated, the best advice would be know your foundation. If you're a data scientist, you're working on a model, you know your model really well. If you're a data analyst and you're responsible for user acquisition, you know your domain really well. So you shouldn't be intimidating to speak up and speak about it, deliver about it. Doesn't really matter your gender, your age, and so on. So when you feel like you don't know foundation, that's where things can become really flaky. But no projects you're working on, be owner for that project. And when you're the owner for the project, deliver it, speak and communicate it. If you still feel pressed, tackle it with your leadership. If it doesn't work, go proactive. Write a blog about it, connect with media, bring it to media. If you have to, there can be different circumstances. Also, first of all, be supportive for all your colleagues. Like the more women company has, and the more supported sometimes you feel. So if you see someone is reaching out to you for the support, be open for it and encourage it. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I love that. Be an owner, and then that way you're like more confident in your work and you can speak out and not be intimidated. I think that's good
Very
advice.
often I see like people want to speak out for the project. They don't have enough either knowledge or background or ownership, right? If sometimes even I know the right solution to a problem, but I'm not the owner for the project. I feel like maybe I shouldn't speak up, but it shouldn't be considered like I can't speak up. So there are a lot of flavors to a situation here. But if you're the owner, definitely speak for it. If you're not the owner, be smart what you speak about.
Moving back to data science, where do you see data science heading in the future? So it's become this very huge, broad field and it's constantly changing. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts of where it might go in the future.
From my perspective, There is democratization of data science happening now. So every day there are tools which help you do your work. So I feel like in the future, maybe you don't even need to know Python to be able to run machine learning. Maybe you don't even need to know break down statistics to understand how support vector machine is working. There are tools right now which help you do that work. So that's where it's moving. It's moving more into democratization and simplification. I feel like in the future, any business stakeholder should be able to pick the right tool and run predictions on their own. The business side of it, understanding how machine learning can improve your product or can give you more users or give you more revenue, that's a challenge. So I do believe there will be demand for product analysts, business analysts, and data analysts, understanding how the models you have, how they can be adjusted to the question or problem you need to solve for.
If someone's interested in going into data, either data science, data analytics, what advice would you give them?
First of advice, know what you want to do. Um, it's it's much difficult to do rather than say, especially for like graduates. Even though they are pushing data science bootcamp, they don't always know like they want to be data scientist. Data scientists can have many flavors. You can be machine learning engineer. You can be business intelligence engineer. You can be NLP specialist. It can be so many different flavors. So my encouragement, know what you want to do. Follow your passion. Are you mostly excited about textual data? Are you excited about music data? Are you excited about images, right? There are so many into it. So the more you narrow down what you enjoy doing, the easier for you will be to create your path. So that's my first advice. Know whom you want to be. The second, make your skill set decent, especially as a beginner. Make sure you have very solid SQL. Make sure you're comfortable with Python. That will be your front door into anything. Unless you have those skills, it's very challenging to land any position. And the third advice, look for mentor. Look for mentor of a coach, of a community support where you feel safe to ask a question, ask for advice, request support, ask for help. I feel those are essential.
Thank you so much, Olga, for all of your amazing insights and for sharing your experiences and stories and all the advice that you've learned over your years in industry. I absolutely loved this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I love these discussions. I can speak forever about data analysis, like one of my favorite subjects. So thank you so much for having me here.
And everyone, go check out Olga's journal. I'll link it in the description below. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this episode of Tech Girl Thursdays. And thank you, Olga, for joining me. And I'll see you all in my next video.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye.